Jesus in the sign of Jonah, and why I need an astrophysicist and or an archaeo-astronomer to check it out. And this is the first section, and I'm going to just put academic reasons. The next section will be biblical support and things like that. Alright, so I'm going to have a lead in here on how I came up with this theory to begin with. Alright, when I graduated from high school, I couldn't do what I wanted to do, so I tried to be a writer. And I knew that I was 19, I couldn't write a novel, there's no way, or a short story, so I thought I'd write a book of poetry. And I sent out manuscripts, and they were all rejected. Some of them did have positive responses, but they were rejected. After that, I said, okay, what makes other poets successful and I can't get published? So then I said, I lowered my sights and I said, I'm going to try to write one poem, and hopefully I get it published in a literary magazine. At least I got something, something to say that I did become a writer. And anyway, I checked an old essay I had, and this was the poem. It was an essay I wrote in my final year of high school, and this poem was in that essay, and it was by Raymond Souster, or Souster, I still don't know how to pronounce his name. But the poem was entitled, A Christ on Young Street. The same long hair, same beard, same gentle eyes. He is smashing his fists against a wall, but not hard enough to draw blood. So of course, no one notices. Alright, I don't know about you, but I liked that poem then, and I still like it now. So I was going to extend the theme. I was going to say, okay, maybe something happened with Jesus that nobody noticed. And then I said, well, if it's in the New Testament, his life story is documented one way or the other. It might be jumbled up. So I decided to focus on when he was in the tomb. All right, what could have happened when he was in the tomb? That went unnoticed. And who pops in my mind but Buddha? I swear to God, I'm trying to write a poem about Jesus, and Buddha pops in my mind. And he was in a lotus position. He held there was a planted flower in the earth. He was holding it by the stem, and he held the earth still. I goes, what's the... And the TV that was playing, there was, the old Universal logo. They used to, movies from the 30s, it had the spinning earth. I said, wait a minute, Earth standing still, spinning earth. And then the opening scene of the movie was the earth rotating on its axis. So then I said, okay, standing still, maybe something happened that affected the earth. Then I said, well, wait a minute, what if an asteroid was coming by and the earth stood still but kept rotating, and then we survived because Jesus died in the tomb, he held the days back, and we survived, and nobody noticed. So after that, I started writing the poem. This is great, right? And I got a little bit into the poem, and I goes, wait a minute, what if it really happened? So after that, I went to the New Testament. I said, was there ever a time when the days were held back or shortened? And this following quote came up. You can check it out in the New Testament. It was, and unless the Lord had shortened the days, no living creature would be saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he has chosen, he has shortened the days. I said, okay, wow, that fits my theory. Now, whether there's an asteroid coming or not, I did research it. There were some near misses. But that's a moot point to me. I'm putting the horse in front of the cart. I want to see if what I said could have happened. All right? And over the years, I'm accumulating some academic evidence that could suggest I could be right. Right? And I'm looking through it, and here's some of them. But before I do that, I have to discuss one thing, or talk about one thing. There's a philosophical principle called Occam's razor, and or a reasoning technique. And that, plainly stated, is if you have a mystery of sorts, and you can't figure out all theories about it don't have any more weight than any other, then it should be the simplest theory that should be given the most credence, right? So the simplest explanation, go with that. And that's going to keep popping up over and over again, all right? So let's just say, as an example, let's say I used to be a substitute teacher. I put this on the board a few times. Let's just say that I went to bed, before I went to bed, I pressed the button and I thought I shut the garage door. All right, I went to bed. The next morning when I went to get the paper, the garage door is open. Okay, what possible reasons could the garage door be open? A, I forgot. I thought I shut the door. Maybe there was a power surge at night, a blip, and it kicked open the garage door. Maybe there was a homeless guy in the garage I didn't know of. Could have been a pigeon inside there. Could have been the police. Sometimes when their radio will trigger off the waves to kick open the garage door. Could have been a solar flare, whatever. Now, the simplest explanation is I forgot. But let's say when I went out to get the paper, then my neighbor said, hey, your garage door is open just like mine. Yeah, so is his. I said, now you have to throw the simplest explanation out. And you say it could have been, the guy said, well, I saw police. There was police parked right in front of that house and they were on the radio. So now the simplest explanation doesn't fit. You have to go with the next one. Maybe it was the radio with the police. Like the police were talking on the radio, that could have triggered the garage door to open. All right? So here's some academic reasons why I could be correct. Or at the very least, why my theory should be investigated, I think. Anyway, we'll start with this one. The early Christians used to celebrate both the day of the crucifixion and the day of the resurrection on the first day of spring, which was they determined was March 25th. Right, that was the day of the first day of spring in the Roman calendar. Okay, that technically is impossible. Occam's razor. Well, why would they have done that? They did it to lure pagans into the Christian faith. You know, pagans with the renewal of life at springtime, they did it to entice pagans to become Christians. The early church did that, but I don't think the early Christians did that. At the very most, they formed a brotherhood of sorts, and you got to remember, they were waiting for Jesus to come back. They were expecting his imminent return. So, like again, the early church did that, but the early Christians didn't. So, if I was right, that could have been a historical observation, because if the world stopped revolving around the sun, but it kept rotating on its axis, then the first day of spring would have been March 25th when he was crucified, and when he was resurrected would have been the same first day of spring. It would have been a different day, but the first day of spring would have been maintained until it starts moving again. Okay, that's one bit of academic. By the way, if you want to check something out on YouTube, there's a site called March 25th, God's Chosen Day, words to that effect. And they state that when the early church, this concerns the early church, they said, you know what, we decided, like, you know, they probably ran into that tradition the early Christians had, said this doesn't make sense. There's no way it could be. They're two separate events. The crucifixion over here, the first day of the resurrection over here, there's a gap between. Christ was in the tomb, right? But what they did was they kept March 25th, and they hooked it up with the Annunciation, or the day Mother Mary got pregnant, right? The whole bit about the angel appearing to Mother Mary and this. If you follow that theme of reasoning, then Christ would have been born on right at December 25th, which links up to the pagan faith, right? When that shows you that they could have adjusted it for the pagans. Hey, you guys are having a party going on where you're actually celebrating the birth of Christ. The early church did that, but the early Christians, I don't think, did that. So that's one reason. Second reason. This is a long time ago. I'm watching a show on Stonehenge. And you know the proper, how it appears, you know, the main monument, the astronomical monument, everybody has seen that. But there was a heel stone that I knew nothing about. And in the documentary, it started discussing the purpose of the heel stone. And if you look at it, it's a rock that goes up and then it goes to a point. And when the summer solstice or the winter solstice takes place, the sun goes right above that point to mark the solstice, right? But then the guy hosting the show said, but it doesn't show the correct time, as it did in ancient times. I said, say 4 days off, right? And it's 4 days off. So you have I'm saying that the event took place with Jesus on the day of his birth, and 3 days while he was in the tomb, right? 4 days off. So the thing is 4 days off. Occam's razor. The heel stone sank. that was his, well, it probably sank over the centuries. Now, if you research the heel stone, it weighs 35 tons. So if you get something that sinks in a straight line, the marker wouldn't have changed. If you had it tipping forward this way, slightly, the mark would have been slightly down, but it would have still taken place in the same time. If it went back this way, the marker would have been over top of it. Same thing. If it would have shifted this way, the solstice would have taken place over the rock. The point would have been tipped over, but it was. So it just happened to sink, and sink in the way where it would show that it would be 4 days off. Now, Stonehenge is a pre-Christian monument, right? So what could have caused it? If it wasn't, could it have been the sinking? Do other pre-Christian monuments, astronomical observatories have a heel stone of their own? Was the sinking universal, or did other places show a discrepancy? Was there ever a case where a heel stone-like marker in front of a Stonehenge in a different country or whatever, was it moved? I don't know. But I can say, like, was there an eclipse that took place that shouldn't have during that period? Was there an eclipse that didn't happen that should have happened? You have all these possibilities, right? So I don't know. I'm not an Archaeo-Astronomer, but I wish somebody would check it out, because I'd like to know if that was just universal to Stonehenge, or if it passed through, you know, if it was noticed by other cultures with their own astronomical thing. By the way, too, one time I used to send out letters to these places to have my theory investigated, and I put down as many academic reasons as I can come up with. And one was a gentleman from the U.S. Naval Observatory, and he was very polite. At least he responded to me. And he said, you know what, this couldn't have happened, Dan, because what you're suggesting would have went against the laws of physics. I'm saying it's a miracle that took place. And he said, of course it would go against the laws of physics. Yeah, but it couldn't happen because it goes against the laws of physics. And then he said, by the way, the solstice never changed. Dan, he talked about a building with a little window, and the solstice shines right through that building, and it goes towards the altar of whatever religion they were worshiping, right? And he said nothing's changed in that regard, but the solstice would have still taken place, right? It's the heel stone. It's the marker that somebody should investigate. Was one shifted over? Could it have happened? So there's two reasons why. Just check it out. I don't know if I'm right. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But if I'm right, I'm right. Okay, other things, historical things, and I have to go into the history of the Julian calendar, and I really don't want to do this, you know, but you'll see why I'm saying this, all right? The Romans used to have a calendar that was based on the lunar form, right? The lunar account of time. And they had it for a long time, and it was screwed up, right? When Julius Caesar became dictator of Rome, he said, I'm going to fix this calendar problem once and for all. So one of the things he did, he hired a group of mathematicians and astronomers. The lead-in guy was called Sogenes. I guess you pronounce it Sosagenus now, but when I talk about him in high school, Sogenes, that's where I'm going. And Sogenes came up with, why don't you switch it to a solar calendar, and then just like basically what we have today, 365 days, 0.25. All right, add a leap year every 4 years. I guess the Egyptians had that type of calendar. Now, that's what the plan was, but there was three things working against the Julian calendar right from the beginning. One, some scholars believe that Sogenes made an error of 24 hours in his determination of the first day of spring. It was the year 46 BC was a long year, you can check it out, and it was formalized in 45 BC to kick in. And some scholars think Occam's razor. Well, the things don't line up, he must have made a mistake. I really don't think he made a mistake when it concerns the first day of spring. On top of everything else, he's working for one of the most powerful men in the world, right? He's going to screw that up. You know, I made a mistake. Oh, really? Oh, okay. You ever see the Detroit Lions? You're going to meet him. You know, like he wouldn't, I don't think he did that. Second thing working against the Julian calendar was Sogenes said you added an intercalary day every 4 years. Well, the pontifices, the guys who were monitoring the calendar, they were adding the intercalary days every 3 years. So it screwed up the calendar right from the beginning. So that was another thing working against the Julian calendar. The third thing that was working against the Julian calendar was the 11-minute and 14-second lag that I guess there's a tropical year, and that shows 11 minutes and 14 seconds. Whether it's too long and too short, I've heard both sides. Whatever it is, you will lose a day after X amount of years. So that was working against the Julian calendar. All right, now we're going to fast forward. Rome conquered Egypt, and when it conquered Egypt, one of the spoils that it brought from Egypt to Rome was an obelisk, and they set it up in the Maritus Field in Rome. It was set up by Augustus. Now there might be another building with it to form what the Greeks used to call a shadow clock. I guess an obelisk by itself wouldn't do it. You have to have two. So whether the Romans fashioned another obelisk to show the right time, quote unquote. He supposedly erected this in 10 BC or 9 BC. So let's make it 9. And when they set it up, the people checking out the calendars noticed a mistake. So they went to Augustus and they said, you know, those guys who started the calendar, they screwed it up right from the beginning. Now here scholars differ. Some scholars say they inserted 12 intercalary days when only 9 were needed, or they inserted 11 intercalary days where only 8 were needed. Any way you look at it, it was a 3-day discrepancy. So Augustus said, okay, let's not do anything yet. When is the next day an intercalary day would have been added? And they said next year, 8 BC. Okay, let's not add the day. That'll adjust the calendar by itself. Then we don't have to do anything. We'll wait till it. And they said, wow, that's pretty smart. Yeah. Well, maybe that's why he was the emperor and you're not. But anyway, that was his thing. We're going to drop, we're not going to add an intercalary day during those years. So 8 BC, most scholars believe it went from 8 BC to 8 AD, and no 8 AD, an intercalary day would have been added. So if the discrepancy was for 3 days, did he drop 4? If you go through it, 8 BC he would have dropped a day, 4 BC he would have dropped a day, 0, and then you have that pesky year 0 that's bothered everybody ever since it was invented. So if it was in a Roman year, 0, and then 4 AD. Right? And then by the time 8 AD swung around, that's when they would add an intercalary day. So here's another question. Did Augustus drop 3 days from the calendar, or was it 4? Okay, I'd like to know that, because that kind of thing, 4 days from the calendar, that means something must have happened. If Socrates did make a mistake right at the beginning, don't you think Augustus would have noticed that? And if he didn't make a mistake, could something else have happened to cause that? Well, one of the theories, and this is an academic theory, but it's based on an event from the Bible. There's an astrophysicist called Dr. David Hughes, and he came up with, if you will, a realistic approach to the Star of Bethlehem. He said, let's look at it down to earth kind of thing. Let's imagine that the Magi were 3 astrologers, and he noticed that there was a Jupiter and Saturn conjunction that was taking place around the year 7 BC. And that, it was taking place, by the way, in the constellation Pisces. And Pisces was the new age that was about to begin. So his theory said the Magi probably followed the star, the conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter, and they ended up, they were heading towards where Jesus was born. They were trying to find the child. Again, you have to remember, the ruling planet of the Jews or Israel was Saturn. Jupiter always represented a king. It happened in the constellation Pisces, which was the age that was new beginning. So this individual is going to be a super king kind of thing, a prominent person for the age of Pisces. Anyway, according to Dr. Hughes, unless he changed his theory from way back when, he stated that in 7 BC, there was a triple Saturn and Jupiter conjunction. And it led him, if you read the thing, it led him to this child Jesus. Now, his argument was it would have appeared very bright. And if it appeared very bright, and if it was going in retrograde motion, it would have looked like it was standing still. Well, my theory, if the Earth was standing still, it would really look like it was standing still. And it would have looked very bright, and it would say, wow, the child, like it says in the New Testament, the star stopped over where the child lay. So that's one plus, and you got to remember this too. That would have taken place right when Augustus was doing his adjustments. So, was another day dropped because of that? I don't know. Like I said, I have to check this out. I can't check it out. I don't have the expertise necessary. But there's another reason why, you know what, that would fit Dr. Hughes' theory if we stood still. Anyway, you've got Augustus. If Socrates did make a mistake of 24 hours, you think Augustus wouldn't have picked up on that? And if he didn't, and you had that event, was it compensated for? So any way you look at it, Augustus fixed the calendar. Okay, by the way, too, I don't know if I mentioned this, but one of the theories is that, remember when I said about March 25th being the day of the crucifixion and supposedly the resurrection, right? The equinoxes and solstice were marked events. All cultures, many cultures with any degree of sophistication, looked at the stars. They would concentrate on the solstice for agriculture or religious reasons, or the equinox. They wanted to see if everything was working right. So, you know, whatever. They wanted the year to go good. So Augustus, Jesus, if Dr. Hughes was correct, if there was 3 Saturn and Jupiter conjunctions in 7 BC, September 77 BC, Christ could have been born on the fall equinox in September 25th. I don't know when the conjunctions took place, but it could have lined up there too, because he could have died on an equinox and have been born on an equinox. Dr. Hughes even said that with the story about the shepherds, they would have been in the fields in the fall, not in the winter, December time, the winter time. So that is a plus. Does it mean anything? I don't know, but I would like it checked out. Before the century ends, I'd like to have a thing. So anyway, going through the Julian calendar, the way I view it, you have 2 possibilities. Oh, by the way, too, you remember like Jesus might have been born on the fall equinox? Well, guess who else was born, or stated he was born on the fall equinox? Augustus. So when he adjusted the Julian calendar, every single time when it would mark the equinox, it would be a celebration of his birthday. When he formed that shadow clock, it was not only to honor Julius Caesar, it was to honor himself. Now, I really doubt if he would have screwed that up when it comes to marking his own birthday, right? So you have 2 choices here as far as I'm concerned. By 5 AD, whatever was thrown at the Julian calendar was adjusted by Augustus. Oh, by the way, it couldn't be the change of latitude, too, because that was well known to the Romans. Pliny the Elder, all this is leading up to Pliny the Elder, by the way. Pliny the Elder said, the Romans, we know about the longest day in Egypt was X amount of years. In Rome, it was one thing. In England, it was another thing. He deduces that if you went to the North Pole, you'd get 24 hours of daylight and 24 hours of night. So the thing about the change of latitude, you can almost throw that out. So yet now, the way I view it is this. One way or the other, either Augustus adjusted the calendar for 5 AD as a new March 25th, or he adjusted it to a March 24.5. It would have been still March 25th, but it was creeping ever closer to the 24th because of the lag. Now, if nothing happened in 45 BC, if the lag would have kicked in, if Augustus did not adjust for that, it would have kicked in and it would have stayed the same, and it would have been a March 24th, first day of spring, sometime in the 70s, 73, 70, somewhere 70 AD, 73, somewhere in that area. So you have two choices. Either there was a brand new March 25th, first day of spring, when Augustus adjusted the calendar, or it was March 24.6. Because if you figure out the years, that's 60 years, where the lag would have been in effect. If you calculate 11 minutes and 14 seconds, you get 11 hours and 14 minutes. It's not exactly over the halfway part, but it's very close to it. 24 hours in a day. And it would have been creeping along to the 24th in late January. Okay. Now all that to get for this. There was a gentleman called Pliny the Elder. Okay, and Pliny was the first person on this planet to come up with an idea and to compile an encyclopedia. It's called The Natural History. And that's one of the few books that has survived intact. And Pliny wrote about everything you can imagine. Insects, fruits and vegetables, volcanoes, you name it. He wanted to compile, well, he was compiling the first encyclopedia. So he was born in 23 AD. He was well educated, around 23 AD. He was well educated, and he was part of the Praetorian group. I guess they served in the military, which he did, and with distinction. But he was writing everything left, right, and center. I don't think of any human being could have written. There's books that he wrote that were lost. Anyway, this is what Pliny said regarding the obelisk that Augustus set up in Rome. All right? For nearly 30 years, the obelisk has been shown not to agree with the calendar. So if you take that statement and look at it, doesn't that imply that at one time the obelisk was working correctly? And it's been not working correctly, and it's been 30 years since Pliny noticed. Okay? So that, again, what Pliny did was he was accumulating facts left, right, and center. But sometimes he did not document when he made his observations. So from what I gathered, he returned to Rome at 59 AD. Okay, and you got to remember, he's accumulating facts for God knows how long. He's been doing it before and after. So 59 AD. Well, if you look at the crucifixion of Christ, you would have to say, well, he was crucified during the time of Pontius Pilate, so that means it had to be somewhere between 26 AD and 36 AD. Tiberius was emperor, so Tiberius was emperor from, I think, 14 AD to 37 AD. Oh, did I say about Pontius Pilate? 23 AD to 36 AD. I don't know if I said BC. But anyway, if he came back to Rome and he noticed that, whereas 30 years, he came back to Rome in 59 AD. Again, he didn't document when he made the observation. Well, if you go 30 years, it would have been 29 BC. Now, the most popular years by scholars for the crucifixion of Christ, they always say the same four. Either 29 AD, 30 AD, 31 AD, or 33 AD. I don't know what happened to 32, but they never mention it. So if you look at it, he comes back to Rome in 59 AD. Well, 30 years from that is 29. That would fit the time of the crucifixion. Anytime shortly there, 30 years before. But he seems to imply that the obelisk was working correctly. Okay, so again, if it was working correctly, then something must have happened to cause it to not work correctly. And the only thing working against the obelisk at that time was the 11 minutes and 14 second lag. Now here is some of Pliny's possible explanations, if I can find it. If I can find it. Here. Okay. Whether it is the sun itself that has changed its course in consequence of some derangement of the heavenly system, or whether that the whole earth has been in some degree displaced from its center, a thing I heard say has been remarked or detected in other places as well. Or, I'm not quoting anymore, or he says it could have been an earthquake that happened in Rome and it just jarred that dial to show the wrong time. Or it could have been the Tiber River must have flooded and it screwed up that obelisk, right? Whether it is the sun itself has changed its course in consequence of some derangement of the heavenly system. If what I said happened, we would have had a shift in the equinox, right? I mean, that would have been, it would have looked like the sun changed its course. Or whether that the whole earth has been in some degree displaced from its center. If something like that happened, what I'm suggesting, and depending if Jesus spent 3 days in the tomb, you would have a March 25th, first day of spring in 5 AD, and if it's 3 days later, it would have been March 22nd, all of a sudden, right? If it was a March 24.6, it would have been what? 3 days later, it would have been March 22.5, whatever. So that could have happened, and it could have happened right at the time when Christ was crucified. Okay, so there is some kind of support here. Okay, so those are the basic things. We'll do another one after that. So for the basic things, like what have I presented here? By the way, an earthquake, planes in Rome. How much research would you have to do to know that there was an earthquake 30 years before? I don't think very much. Did the Tiber flood? I mean, would that have caused the obelisk not to show the right time? It seems like the obelisk was working correctly, and then all of a sudden there was a shift. And if I'm correct, that shift was one equinox became another one very, very quickly. Now we have to go back to the lag. All right. The lag, 11 minutes and 14 seconds, right? If it wasn't adjusted, it would accumulate, which is exactly what happened. Okay, by the time Pope Gregory was Pope in the 1500s, the first day of spring was taking place on March 11th, right? And he said, we can't have this because we can't adjust our Easter celebration because it's too early. So he hired a team of mathematicians, and they, a group of them, and the smartest one of the bunch was somebody called Christopher Clavis. And it took 10 years for Christopher Clavis to figure out a solution and 6 years to implement. So what they did was they went back, they dropped 10 days from the calendar from 1582 to 325 AD when the Council of Nicaea met, a group of Christians met, and they documented the first day of spring as March 21st. Now there's a discrepancy there too. We celebrate our equinox, whatever it is, on the 21st and 22nd. But from what I gather, Pope Gregory tried to adjust it to March, to the 20th, March 20 to the 21st, that 2-day period. So according to the Council of Nicaea, they documented the calendar at March 21st. It could have been as early as March 20th, point something, 7 or 6, whatever. So, okay, here's the equation that's given by most scholars for how many days we would have lost because of the lag. If you went by we're going by 1 day lost every 128 years. In 1582, the equinox was at March 11th. We know that. In 302, because of the adjustments, it was at March 21st. The Council of Nicaea met in 325 AD. That would match. 174 AD, the equinox is at March 22. Go to 46 AD, and you have a March 23 first day of spring. How could it shift from March 25th at March 5 AD to March 23rd in 46 AD? Here we go again. 129 years, 1 day lost. March 11th, 1582. 292, you would have had a March 21st, first day of spring in 292. 163, a March 22nd, first day of spring. March 23, In 34 AD, there would have been a March 23, first day of spring. The calendar was set at 5 AD, probably March 25th or March 24.5. How could it shift so quickly? 1582, March 130 years. Equation, minus 10 times 10, you get in 282, you get a March 21st, first day of spring taking place in 282. 22nd, first day of spring in 152 AD. Then you would have a March 23rd, first day of spring on the 24th of March. The calendar was like, how could it shift so quickly? And here is 1582. This is the largest number, 133 years. 1582, March 11th. 252, March 21st. 119, March 22nd. And 14, March 23rd. 14 AD. That doesn't match. Okay, anyway, you get my point. Something must have happened that probably the crucifixion of Christ takes place right between those years. Something is wrong. How could it shift so quickly? Now, if you want to comment with me, I think it'd be better. I wrote all this out. You can check out what I wrote. You go to the JFK assassination forum, the off-topic section, and look for the post starts with Jesus, right? You can read it as a guest if you want, and if you want to comment and you want to discuss with this, you can sign in by any name you want. It doesn't have to be your real name. You can put in, Joe Blow, whatever you want, but we can have a discussion there. Anyway, by the way, too, the next section, I have biblical evidence that could support me. Okay, so that's it. Well, I hope to see you next time. Thank you very much.